Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It was supposed to be just another ordinary afternoon in the garden. The sun hung low over the sprawling Brookfield estate, spilling gold over the hedges that framed the old mansion. Ella knelt beside a row of roses, pruning shears in her gloved hands, her knees pressed into the damp soil. The air smelled of rain and jasmine. Her back ached, but the rhythmic snip of the shears gave her a small sense of peace. She had been working here for only 2 weeks, just a temporary gardener filling in for her uncle, but it felt like a different world. The marble fountains, the endless lawns, the silence of wealth that made every sound feel like a trespass. She thought the man who lived here was away on business. Everyone did. The estate manager only said the owner traveled often and left instructions for the gardens to be maintained. So when she saw Daniel, the quiet man who trimmed the hedges every morning, walking toward her with a sealed envelope in hand, she assumed he was just another worker like her. He wore the same dark green uniform, the same leather gloves, and the same guarded expression. "You missed a spot," he said gently, kneeling beside her. His voice was calm, deep, like a low hum that matched the rustle of the leaves. She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Guess I am still learning your system." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he extended the envelope. "I need your help," he said. "Something unusual." She blinked, confused. "My help? With what?" He hesitated for a heartbeat, his eyes searching hers. "I need you to pretend to be my wife. For 30 days. The pruning shears slipped from her hand, hitting the soil with a dull thud. "I am sorry, what?" she whispered, half laughing, half stunned. Daniel's expression did not change. "It is not a joke. I can explain everything, but not here." She looked around the empty garden, heart thudding in her chest. The absurdity of his request collided with the quiet intensity in his eyes. He was not teasing. He was deadly serious. "Why me?" she finally asked. "Because," he said quietly, "you are the only person here who does not know who I really am." Ella stared at him, bewildered. "You are a gardener." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "That is what everyone thinks." The air between them grew heavy. A single drop of sweat slid down her neck as the wind rustled through the trees. He placed the envelope beside her basket of tools. "Read it. If you agree, meet me at the cottage behind the east gate tonight at 7. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. She watched him go, her mind spinning. What kind of man asked a stranger to be his wife? What could possibly be inside that envelope? She looked down at it, the paper thick and expensive, sealed with dark wax stamped with a crest she did not recognize. Her pulse quickened. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was not just a gardener's request. It was something much bigger. And it was about to change everything she thought she knew about her life, and about him. That night, rain brushed softly against the windows of the small cottage behind the east gate. Ella stood outside, clutching the envelope that had haunted her all afternoon. Her hands trembled slightly as she read its contents once more. It was a handwritten contract, neat and formal, signed only with the name Daniel Brooks. The terms were short but shocking. She would act as his wife for 30 days, attend 3 family gatherings, keep the arrangement secret, and receive $100,000 when the agreement ended. Her breath fogged in the cool air as she stared at his signature. She thought of her mother lying in a hospital bed, the unpaid bills, the calls from creditors. A mix of fear and desperation pulled her forward. The door opened before she could knock. Daniel stood there, dressed in a dark sweater, his expression unreadable. The room behind him glowed softly with lamplight. "You came," he said quietly. She stepped inside, water dripping from her coat. The cottage was simple, but the scent of cedar and coffee gave it warmth. "I read it," she said. "But I do not understand why me. You could have asked anyone." Daniel studied her face, then walked to the table and placed 2 cups of tea down. "I needed someone who does not belong to my world. Someone who will not ask questions or chase what comes with my name." She frowned. "You talk like you are in hiding." He gave a small, tired smile. "In a way, I am." He gestured to the contract. "You have until midnight to decide." Ella sat down slowly, her eyes moving between the paper and his face. "If I say yes," she asked softly, "what exactly do you expect from me?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Nothing more than honesty and silence. We will attend a few gatherings where people expect to see me married. My father's will requires it for a short period. After that, you walk away with your payment, and we never speak again." The steadiness in his tone unsettled her. "You sound as if this means nothing to you." His gaze softened for the first time. "It does, but not in the way you think." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain deepened, tapping steadily on the roof. Finally, Ella whispered, "And what happens if I refuse?" "Then I find someone else," he said, his eyes holding hers. "But I would rather it be you." That honesty disarmed her. She exhaled slowly, reaching for the pen that lay beside the contract. Her hand hesitated only once before signing her name. Daniel's eyes followed the ink as it curved across the page. "Welcome to the arrangement, Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice almost too quiet to hear. The word "Mrs." echoed inside her like something fragile. Later that night, as she returned to her small rented room above the bakery in town, she could not stop thinking about his expression when she signed. There had been no triumph, no relief, only a kind of sorrow, as if he had just made a promise he was not sure he could keep. She sat on her narrow bed, staring at the rain sliding down the window. The envelope lay on her lap, the seal now broken, her name beside his on the contract. $100,000. 30 days. Pretend to be the wife of a man who hid more secrets than he admitted. It sounded like a lie she could live with, at least for a little while. But deep down, something told her this was not about money at all. The way he looked at her, the quiet weight in his voice, there was a story buried beneath his calm exterior, and before the month was over, she would find out who Daniel Brooks really was. The morning sun stretched over the Brookfield estate, glinting off the tall glass windows of the mansion that would soon become her new home. Ella arrived just after 7, her old pickup truck rattling down the gravel driveway. She carried one suitcase and the weight of a decision that still felt unreal. The main gates had opened silently for her, as if the entire property had been waiting. The housekeeper, Mrs. Linton, met her at the entrance, polite but distant, the kind of woman who measured worth in posture and tone. "Mr. Brooks is expecting you," she said, leading Ella through the grand foyer. The marble floors reflected their footsteps. Chandeliers hung like frozen rain, and portraits lined the walls, faces of power, all with the same sharp eyes. Ella had never been surrounded by so much beauty that felt so cold. Daniel stood by the staircase, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. He looked nothing like the quiet gardener she had met among the rose bushes. There was authority in the way he held himself, confidence that filled the space before he even spoke. "Good morning, Mrs. Brooks," he said, the corners of his mouth barely lifting. For a second, she forgot to breathe. "You look different," she managed, her voice almost a whisper. "That is the point," he replied softly. "Follow me. There are details we need to finalize before tonight." He led her into his study, a room lined with shelves of old books and the faint scent of oak. On the desk lay a list of events, appearances, and rehearsed gestures. "You will attend 3 gatherings with me," he explained. "The first is this evening, a dinner with the board members of my father's company. It will not be long, but it will be public. You must act natural." We have to make them believe this is real. She scanned the paper. You planned everything, she said quietly. I plan what I must, Daniel replied. And you will have everything you need. A wardrobe, jewelry, and a car with a driver. You will stay here during the 30 days. She hesitated. In the same house. His eyes lifted from the papers, amused. In the same house. Different rooms. She nodded, trying to steady her heartbeat. He continued, outlining the rules she had already read. No questions about his family, no discussions of the contract with anyone, no emotional involvement. The words sounded simple, almost clinical. But as he spoke, his voice softened. If at any point this feels too much, you can leave. The payment will still stand. That last sentence caught her off guard. Why would you say that? She asked. He looked out the window for a long moment before answering. Because I have seen too many people stay for the wrong reasons. His tone carried something deeper, something wounded. Ella wanted to ask more, but the knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Linton returned, holding a garment bag and a velvet box. The attire for tonight, she said. Inside the box was a ring, simple, elegant, not extravagant. Daniel took it and held it out to her. If you are going to play the part, he said quietly, you need the symbol that makes it believable. Her hands trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Do not worry, he added, almost in a whisper. It is only a prop. But when their eyes met, something unspoken flickered between them, something neither wanted to name. Hours later, as the evening approached, Ella stood before the mirror in a soft ivory dress that Mrs. Linton had chosen. She barely recognized the woman staring back. The ring caught the light, reflecting tiny sparks of gold. For the first time, she wondered if pretending would really be as simple as they both claimed. Outside, the car engine purred, waiting to take them to the dinner that would test every boundary of their agreement. Ella took a deep breath, stepped out of the room, and followed Daniel into the night that would define everything that came next. The car rolled smoothly through the city, headlights cutting through the drizzle that had begun to fall. Ella sat in silence beside Daniel, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She could feel her pulse in her throat, every beat louder as they neared the tall glass building glowing in the distance. Tonight was their first appearance together as husband and wife, and though Daniel's calm exterior seemed unshakable, she could sense a quiet tension beneath it. He adjusted his cufflinks and glanced at her. Remember, he said softly, smile when they speak to you, hold my arm, and let me lead the conversation. She nodded, swallowing hard. What if they ask how we met? Tell them the truth, he replied, his voice steady. That we met in the garden. Sometimes the simplest story is the most believable. The elevator doors opened to a cascade of light, laughter, and soft piano music. Inside the ballroom, every face seemed polished, every gesture rehearsed. Waiters glided between the tables carrying trays of champagne. As Daniel guided her through the crowd, heads turned. Whispers followed. Ella lifted her chin, remembering his instructions, though her heart thudded with every step. Mr. Brooks, a man called, his tone cheerful but sharp. We thought you would never settle down. Daniel's smile was polite but distant. Life has a way of surprising us, he said, drawing Ella closer. The man's gaze lingered on her. And this must be your wife. Ella extended her hand, managing a calm smile. It is lovely to meet you. A pleasure, the man said, though his eyes were full of calculation. As they moved away, Ella exhaled, whispering, Are they always like that? Daniel gave a faint smile. Worse, sometimes. At their table, she noticed the woman seated across from them, a striking brunette with perfect posture and an expression carved from ice. Eleanor Brooks, Daniel's cousin. She did not smile. So, Eleanor said, her voice smooth but cold. This is the new Mrs. Brooks. Ella nodded politely. Yes. I am very happy to meet you. I am sure, Eleanor replied, her tone dripping with disbelief. Tell me, how long have you known Daniel? A few months, Ella said honestly. We met when I was working in the garden. The woman's eyebrow arched. The garden? Her laugh was soft, but cruel. Well, at least the roses have finally paid off. Daniel's voice cut in, calm but firm. Eleanor. The warning in his tone made the table fall silent. Eleanor lifted her glass, unfazed. Just making conversation. Ella's stomach twisted, but she forced a small smile. It is all right, she said, meeting Eleanor's gaze. I suppose we all start somewhere. The woman blinked, surprised by her composure. Daniel glanced at Ella, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses. Yet beneath the elegance, Ella could feel the eyes watching, weighing every gesture. When dessert arrived, a board member leaned over to Daniel. Your wife is charming, he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. A refreshing change from the usual faces here. Daniel gave a curt nod. She is genuine, he said. That is rare these days. The man laughed awkwardly, not sure if it was a compliment or a warning. Later, as the evening ended and they stepped into the cool night air, Ella finally let out the breath she had been holding. Was I convincing enough? She asked. Daniel looked at her, his expression softening. You were perfect. For a moment, their eyes held in the glow of the city lights. Then he offered his arm again, formal but gentle. Let us go home, Mrs. Brooks. The word home lingered in the air, and for the first time, it did not sound like part of the act. On the drive back, silence settled between them, but it was different now, less awkward, more charged. When the mansion came into view, rain still whispering against the car windows, Ella turned to look at him. You handled them well, he said. Especially Eleanor. She smiled faintly. She hates me already. She hates everyone, he replied. But you made her lose her footing. That is not easy. As the car stopped before the gates, he added quietly, thank you for tonight. She looked at him, puzzled. For what? For being exactly who you are. And as they stepped into the quiet glow of the house, the boundaries of their contract began to blur, one heartbeat at a time. The following days passed in quiet rhythm, like a play rehearsed behind closed doors. Ella spent her mornings walking the gardens she once worked in, now from the other side of the estate windows. Each afternoon, Daniel's driver would take them to a new appointment, an investor luncheon, a charity brunch, or a family visit where every smile felt like a test. Yet something about Daniel began to change. He was still measured, still guarded, but the walls around him were no longer solid. One evening, after another long day of polite small talk and carefully staged affection, Ella wandered to the glass house at the back of the property. The night air was cool and carried the scent of wet soil and lilies. Inside, the faint hum of the sprinkler system filled the silence. She traced her fingers over the petals of a blooming orchid, lost in thought. Behind her, Daniel's voice broke the quiet. You should not be here alone at night. She turned, startled, then smiled faintly. I did not realize flowers had visiting hours. He stepped closer, his hands in his pockets. The soft light from the lanterns caught the lines of his face, gentler now than she remembered. They remind me of my mother, he said after a pause. She built this garden herself. Every path, every tree. She said plants tell the truth about people. Ella tilted her head. How so? Because they only thrive when you care for them, he said quietly. His eyes lingered on her, and she felt the weight of the moment settle between them. You do not talk much about your family, she said softly. There is not much left to talk about, he replied. The sadness in his voice made her chest tighten. My father built everything you see here, but he forgot to live in it. My mother was the only one who kept this place alive. When she passed, the house went silent. Sometimes I think I hired the garden staff just to hear life again. Ella looked around, the vines curling along the beams, the faint glow of fireflies through the glass. "Then why hide out here pretending to be one of them?" she asked. Daniel smiled, not in amusement but in confession. "Because when you are the owner, everyone lies to you. But when you are the gardener, people show who they really are." For a long time, neither spoke. The hum of the sprinklers faded, replaced by the rhythm of their breathing. Then he reached for a nearby plant and plucked a small white blossom, twirling it between his fingers. "You looked nervous at the dinner," he said. "But you held your ground. You reminded me of my mother." Ella blinked, taken aback. "That is the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." "It is the truth," he said. "And it has been a long time since I have said the truth out loud." The honesty in his tone left her speechless. She wanted to tell him how much he confused her, how every part of this arrangement felt both unreal and deeply real at the same time. Instead, she just whispered, "You are not as cold as you pretend to be." He looked at her then, really looked, his expression unguarded. "And you are not as fragile as you think you are." For a moment, they stood there in the soft glow of the garden lights, surrounded by the whisper of leaves and the quiet hum of night. Then Daniel stepped back, his composure returning. "Come inside," he said. "It is getting late." As they walked back toward the house, their shoulders brushed once, an accidental touch that neither mentioned but both felt linger far too long. Later that night, as Ella lay in her room staring at the ceiling, she could still hear his voice, the way he said her name for the first time. Somewhere between the contract and the silence, something fragile had begun to grow, something no paper could define. And though she tried to ignore it, she knew the truth was taking root, just like the flowers in his mother's garden. Days turned into weeks, and the lines between act and reality began to blur. Ella found herself learning Daniel's routines without realizing it, the way he liked his coffee just before sunrise, black with 1 spoon of sugar, or how he disappeared into his study every night to read his mother's old journals. The mansion that once felt cold and enormous now carried small traces of warmth. The staff had grown used to her presence. Mrs. Linton even began leaving her little notes with reminders about Daniel's preferences, as if acknowledging that she belonged. Yet for Ella, belonging was the part she feared most. She reminded herself that this was temporary, a role with an expiration date written in ink. Still, her heart ignored logic. One morning, she found Daniel in the library, standing by the window as sunlight painted his face in soft gold. He looked lost in thought, a rare stillness replacing his usual composure. "You are awake early," he said, noticing her reflection in the glass. "Could not sleep," she admitted. "Too many thoughts." He turned, studying her face. "About what?" "About when this ends," she said before she could stop herself. Daniel's gaze shifted. "You are thinking about after?" "It is hard not to," she said softly. "You said 30 days, but what happens when the time is up? We both go back to pretending none of this was real?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "That was the agreement." "I know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But agreements do not prepare you for what feelings might do." The silence between them deepened. Daniel looked down at the book in his hand, then closed it carefully. "You should not think that way," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Because it will hurt less when it ends?" His eyes lifted, and for the first time, she saw conflict there. "Yes," he said finally. "Because I cannot offer more than what I already promised." Ella felt a sting in her chest. She nodded, trying to mask her disappointment. "Then I will try not to think that way." She turned to leave, but he reached out, his fingers brushing her wrist. "Ella," he said softly, "what I meant was that this you and I, it is already more than I expected." The touch lingered for a heartbeat before he pulled away, retreating into the safe distance he always kept. That evening, they attended a private board dinner in the city. The night glittered with chandeliers and shallow conversation. Yet when Daniel spoke, everyone listened. Ella watched him with quiet admiration. He carried authority with effortless grace, but she also noticed how lonely that power looked. During a pause between courses, Eleanor leaned across the table, her smile sharp as glass. "You play your part well, dear," she said. "But I wonder how much he told you about why he really needed a wife." Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, a warning in their calmness. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "that is enough." She ignored him, turning back to Ella. "Did he mention the clause in the will? The one that says he loses half the estate if he remains unmarried before the fiscal year ends?" The room went still. Ella's fork froze halfway to her lips. Daniel's voice was steady but low. "You should stop now." Eleanor smirked. "So it is true." Ella's chest tightened. The puzzle pieces snapped into place, painful in their clarity. She forced a smile, pushing back her chair. "Excuse me," she said softly, standing before anyone could see her eyes. She walked quickly through the crowded room, ignoring the stares. Behind her, she heard Daniel call her name once, but she did not turn back. Outside, the night air was cold, sharp enough to sting. She stood on the sidewalk, the city lights blurring through tears. The contract, the secrecy, the distance, it all made sense now. It had never been about her. It had been business all along. When the car pulled up, Daniel stepped out, his tie undone, his voice rough. "Ella, please, let me explain." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "You already did, just not with words." He stepped closer, rain beginning to fall around them. "It was not supposed to happen this way," he said. "Then what way was it supposed to happen?" she whispered. "Because right now, it feels like I was just another line in your plan." He said nothing. The silence between them was louder than the rain. Finally, she turned away, opening the car door herself. "The contract ends in a week," she said quietly. "You will not have to pretend anymore." And before he could answer, she stepped inside and closed the door, leaving him standing alone in the downpour, watching the car fade into the city night. The following week passed in a haze of silence. Ella packed her belongings from the mansion without ceremony. The rooms that once felt like a dream now echoed with emptiness. Every trace of her time there, the dresses, the ring, the faint scent of lilies from the glass house, became painful reminders of something that was never meant to last. Mrs. Linton tried to offer polite sympathy, but even she seemed unsure what to say. Daniel had not spoken to Ella since that night in the rain. She assumed he was busy closing the deal that had started this lie in the first place. Still, part of her wished he would come to explain, even if the truth was ugly. On her last morning, she walked through the garden one final time. The flowers glistened under the dew, the same garden where it had all begun. She knelt beside the white orchids, brushing her fingers against a fallen petal. "Goodbye," she whispered, unsure whether she meant it for the flowers or for him. That afternoon, she returned to her small apartment in the city. The quiet felt heavier than before, the walls too close, the air too still. Life should have gone back to normal, yet nothing about it felt normal anymore. She took a part-time job at a local nursery, tending to plants the way she used to, but every time she touched the soil, she remembered Daniel's voice. Plants tell the truth about people. She wondered what truth he had been hiding. One rainy evening, a letter arrived in an envelope marked with the Brookfield seal. Her heart raced as she opened it, only to find a check for the remaining payment and a brief note in his handwriting: "Thank you for keeping your word." No apology. No explanation. Just a final transaction, as promised. She sat on the edge of her bed, the paper trembling in her hands. Tears blurred the ink until the words dissolved into nothing. She tore the check in half, then into pieces, letting them fall like snow to the floor. "I did not do it for the money," she whispered. Days later, the story of the Brooks Foundation Gala filled the news. Daniel Brooks had announced a new project in his mother's name: a massive restoration of the estate gardens into a sanctuary open to the public. He stood at the podium, his voice calm, his ring finger bare. Ella watched from her phone, the screen glowing in the dim light of her apartment. He looked the same, controlled, composed, but there was something different in his eyes, a quiet sadness that mirrored her own. When he said, "This place was built from love, not legacy," her breath caught. It was the first time she had heard him speak from the heart, even if it was not to her. That night, as thunder rolled in the distance, Ella stepped onto her small balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly below. She closed her eyes, feeling the cool rain on her skin. Somewhere in that vast world, Daniel was out there, still pretending to be fine. And though she told herself it was over, a part of her knew their story was not finished. Not yet. Because some promises are written not on paper, but in the silence left behind. A month later, Ella was closing up the nursery when a sleek black car stopped outside. The driver stepped out and handed her an ivory envelope sealed with the Brookfield crest. Inside was a simple invitation card that read, "You are cordially invited to the grand opening of the Brooks Sanctuary." Her pulse quickened as she read the final line, "A place built from truth, in honor of love." She told herself she would not go, yet the words echoed in her mind for days. When the morning of the event arrived, she found herself driving toward the estate without quite knowing why. The mansion looked different this time. The iron gates were open, and the once private gardens overflowed with people, music, and laughter. Children ran through the paths she had once trimmed herself, their laughter soft against the breeze. A stage had been built near the glass house, and standing on it, addressing the crowd, was Daniel Brooks. He looked the same, elegant in his tailored suit, but his voice carried something new. "This sanctuary," he said to the audience, "was inspired by someone who reminded me that truth and kindness can grow even in the most unlikely places. She showed me that love is not a transaction but a choice made every day." Ella stood at the back, half hidden behind a row of trees. Her breath caught when he looked up, his gaze sweeping across the crowd until it found her. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Daniel stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward her. The crowd parted quietly, as if they understood what was unfolding. When he reached her, the noise faded until it was just the two of them under the soft afternoon light. "You came," he said, his voice slow. "I should not have," she replied, though her eyes betrayed her heart. "Then why did you?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "Maybe to see if you meant what you said." Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out something small wrapped in a handkerchief. When he opened it, she saw the wooden bracelet he had given her weeks ago, the one she had left behind on his desk. "You left this," he said. "I kept it because I could not let go of the person who made me remember who I am." Ella's throat tightened. "You had a choice, Daniel. You could have told me the truth." "I know," he said, his voice rough. "But I was afraid that if I told you why I started all this, I would lose the one thing that had become real." He took a step closer. "You were never part of a plan, Ella. You were the reason I wanted to change it." The sincerity in his eyes broke through the walls she had built. The air between them was heavy with everything unspoken. Finally, she whispered, "So what happens now?" Daniel smiled faintly, the first true smile she had seen in weeks. "Now," he said, holding out his hand, "we start again. No contracts, no lies. Just us." The crowd erupted in applause as he gently placed the bracelet back around her wrist. The gesture was simple, but the meaning was everything. For the first time, she did not feel like a guest in his world. She felt like she belonged. And as they stood together beneath the blooming archway of his mother's garden, Ella realized that some stories do not end when the contract expires, they begin when the truth finally takes root. The weeks that followed felt like the first chapter of a story neither of them had dared to believe could exist. The sanctuary bloomed with life, a living memory of everything Daniel's mother had built and everything he had almost lost. Ella spent her days there, helping the volunteers, guiding children through the rose paths, and watching Daniel work beside her, not as the distant billionaire she had once feared, but as the man who now understood what it meant to build something real. The press called it a love story born from redemption, but to them it was simply truth finding its way home. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the garden in gold, Daniel led her to the old glass house where it had all begun. Inside, the air smelled of lilies and rain. He turned to her, his eyes soft, the same calm she had fallen in love with before she even knew it. "Do you remember what I said about plants?" he asked. "That they only grow when you care for them," she replied, smiling. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Then I hope you believe me when I say I want to spend the rest of my life caring for you." Ella's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a ring simple, elegant, just like the wooden bracelet that still circled her wrist. "Daniel," she whispered, her eyes filling. "You do not have to do this to prove anything." "I am not proving," he said softly. "I am choosing." He went down on one knee, the late sunlight glinting off the glass around them. "You once signed a contract that bound us for 30 days. This time, I am asking for forever." Her laughter broke through her tears as she knelt down with him. "You always did have a way with words," she said, her voice trembling with joy. "And you always had a way of making me believe them," he replied. When she nodded, unable to speak, he slipped the ring onto her finger. The crowd outside, unaware of the quiet moment within, continued to wander the sanctuary, their voices distant and soft like music. But inside that glass house, the world had stilled. Daniel pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing the gardener when everyone else only saw the owner." She smiled through her tears. "And thank you," she said, "for proving that love is not something you inherit, it is something you grow." As they stepped outside hand in hand, the sky stretched open above them, the garden glowing under the light of evening. The wooden bracelet on her wrist brushed against the new ring, two symbols of one truth: that love built on honesty could outlast any promise written on paper. And so, under the same trees where everything began, Ella and Daniel found their ending. Not a perfect one, but a true one. The kind of ending that does not fade when the lights go out, but blooms quietly, season after season, in the garden of forever.